And now on BBC Two, we return to David and Luke with another episode of We Need to Talk About. So, Luke, the story is we both need to work from home, we both need to self-isolate, we both need to practice social distancing. What's the plan for the next episode?
Well, the bunker's out of the question, as is the pub.
Right, so I guess we're going to have to do this over the phone then. What's the plan? What should we review this time?
Well, it might be a good excuse to go through this pile of unwatched DVDs I've got here.
Yeah, likewise, matey.
Well, why don't you go through some of those then? Saves us from going mad whilst we're socially distancing ourselves. We can do some short reviews of some random DVDs that you've bought and watched. Just grab a DVD at random now, and we'll review that.
Let's have a look. Just grab one completely at random. Oh, how about this one? Ninja the Protector.
No, stop that. Stop that. Put it down. Put it down now. Step away from the Godfrey Ho.
Okay, well, what about this one? Spearhead from Space. The very first Doctor Who story of the 1970s, the very first story to be broadcast entirely in colour, and the very first story for a Doctor Who actor who's become a bit of a hero figure here on the We Need to Talk About universe. If we were to do a Hall of Fame, that would likely consist of people like Sean Connery, John Barrowman, Patrick Stewart, Richard Harrison, and this gentleman as well, one Mr. Jon Pertwee.
SPLINK!
What was that?
Okay, we'll do that then. I can't guarantee this is going to be a short review though. You know what I'm like with Doctor Who. It's an iPod. Jon Pertwee was one of the most popular and beloved actors to ever play the Time Lord, and even to this day is many of Whovians' favourite Doctor. Pertwee was already a household name at the time due to his various comedy roles on film, radio and television. When he told his agent that he wanted to audition for the part, he was surprised to find that his name was actually already on the BBC shortlist for the new Doctor.
It's flexible, you know. Could be useful on the planet Delphon, where they communicate with their eyebrows.
By an unusual coincidence, he had previously acted alongside another former Doctor Who, William Hartnell, in the 1953 British comedy film Will Any Gentleman?, with Pertwee being the comic relief to Hartnell's stern-faced detective inspector.
I hope I'm not interrupting you.
No, we were expecting you.
Well,
Yes. Were we? Oh, I don't know.
I didn't give the maid my name because I don't like frightening people.
No, of course not. Who are you?
Even if you don't instantly recognise him from the 1970s playing the Time Lord, he would later go on to play another childhood favourite during the 80s as the talking scarecrow, Wurzel Gummidge. So, grab a cup of tea and a slice of cake, reverse the polarity of the neutron flow on your DVD player, and let's get settled in for some classic Doctor Who. Previous Doctor stories had all involved time and space travel. For the third Doctor, and this was likely for production and likely sort of budget reasons, Pertwee's stories initially depicted the Doctor as stranded on Earth. The production team had come to realise that the costs of building different alien worlds and costumes for each episode was getting larger and larger, and was starting to get impractical. There was also a struggle to try and meet the polished production values of American imports like Star Trek that the British public were now becoming used to. Doctor Who needed to change with the times, but in doing so it took inspiration from another popular piece of science fiction, Quatermass.
Isn't your concern unduly personal? I think we all realise how much is owed to your formative influence.
I brought the rocket group into being.
But it is, after all, a government project. It always has been. It was intended for peaceful scientific research, not to be perverted to fulfill such a monstrous conception as this dead man's deterrent.
Oh, I'm so pleased to be able to talk about Quatermass again. As we have discussed previously in our Life Force episode, the character of Professor Bernard Quatermass was created by the legendary science fiction writer Nigel Kneale. Quatermass was a character that appeared in 3 BBC serials during the 1950s that used his intellect and his morality to defeat menacing threats from alien invaders intent on destroying the Earth, which, as I'm sure you'll agree, sounds rather familiar. It was agreed that this was the format that Doctor Who would take on as the 1970s began to roll in.
The final story of the 5th season, Patrick Troughton's era, The Web of Fear, was an early indication that this new approach would work very well in Doctor Who. With an adventure set purely on Earth, this serial saw the Doctor encountering an army of, yes, evil robotic yetis in the spooky tunnels of the London Underground. Which, despite the fact that it sounds a little ridiculous, was in fact a huge hit with audiences. This particular episode was used as an example to follow when rebooting the Doctor for his 3rd generation. Another important factor in the story that would go on to be an influence in the 3rd Doctor's era would be the presence of the army, both as a help and as a hindrance to the Doctor. This addition is best personified by Colonel Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart, the stoic army officer in charge of the Allied forces, played by Nicholas Courtney.
This character would return in another story in the Troughton era, but this time in charge of a specialised team put together to investigate and combat paranormal and extraterrestrial threats to the Earth. This team would become known as the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, or UNIT for short.
Yes, well, since the Yeti do, I've been in charge of an independent intelligence group that we call UNIT. That's United Nations Intelligence Task Force.
You mean you're like a world secret police?
Not quite. We don't actually arrest people. We just investigate.
These new allies of the Doctor gave the production team plenty of ideas to work with in terms of the Doctor's Earthbound Adventures. The Doctor, now stuck on Earth, would work in a Quatermass-like role as scientific advisor to UNIT.
Within the story, the Doctor had been punished by his own race, the Timelords, during the events of Troughton's final serial, The War Games. He is sentenced to be exiled to Earth, forced to regenerate, and for his TARDIS to be disabled, with all of the Doctor's knowledge of time travel wiped from his memory.
From the start, Pertwee seems very, very comfortable in this role as the Doctor and isn't afraid to play the Time Lord as a different character from the previous incarnations. He still has some whimsical moments, but this new Doctor is a dapper man of action who isn't afraid to get physical if he needs to.
This Doctor would even go as far as to use martial arts, in particular some Aikido skills that he apparently picked up from Venus. Well, it was the 1970s. Everybody really was kung fu fighting during that time, so why not the Doctor as well? This Doctor was also fond of motoring, handling all manner of vehicles. His favourite car was a canary yellow vintage roadster that he nicknamed Bessie. He also had a tendency to ride around on motorbikes as well, and he also had a hovercraft-like vessel that fans would nickname the Who-mobile.
Oh God.
Doctor,
The Who-mobile.
flying!
Of course we're flying.
It was also this Doctor that started the catchphrase about reversing the polarity of the neutron flow. The phrase was Pertwee's way of dealing with the techno-babble that he was required to speak as the Doctor, and it would be something that would continue to be referred to for years later as a running joke. Actually, he never said it. He only ever said it once. I think it was in The Five Doctors, and Terence Dicks put it in there as a joke.
The first serial for the Third Doctor was first broadcast in 4 weekly parts on BBC One from the 3rd to the 4th of January 1970, and that is what we'll be reviewing here today. Our story begins when a bunch of meteorites hurtle through space and crash in the charming English countryside.
A local man comes across them as the TARDIS pops up and the new Doctor steps out of his now non-functional time machine, still wearing Patrick Troughton's clothes, only to then fall flat on his face. With the Doctor promptly shipped off to the hospital, UNIT steps in to see just exactly what is up with these meteors.
Yes, sir. Get into the vehicle and back to the unit labs right away.
Complicating matters is that the local man has taken one of the meteorites and he's gone and hidden it in his garden shed, away from the eyes of his nagging wife. Something that certain men of a certain generation will be able to identify with, I'm sure.
David, what was that?
Nothing, dear. Thankfully, the Doctor is starting to recover in hospital, even to the point where he's tried to escape a few times. As UNIT agents are keeping an eye on him, we are then reintroduced to now Brigadier Lethbridge-Stewart, who is bewildered that the man who claims he is the Doctor now looks completely different.
Lethbridge-Stewart? My dear fella, how nice to see you again.
He knows you, sir.
But he can't do.
Look here.
Can you hear me? Who are you?
Don't you recognize me?
I'm positive we've never met before.
Oh, dear. Oh, I can't have changed that much, surely.
Not only is this a great way of bringing him back into the show for the new series, this is also a good introduction story for a newly recruited unit scientist, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, played by Caroline John, and who would later become the Doctor's regular companion.
Then what do you do, exactly?
We deal with the odd, the unexplained. They're living on Earth, or even beyond.
Alien invaders? Little blue men with 3 heads?
Pertwee has great on-screen chemistry with his 2 new co-stars, and some good humour comes out of the relationship that the 3 characters share in this storyline. The supporting cast are all game here as well, but it really is this trio that steal the show, and will continue to do so in subsequent episodes.
With the help of his new allies, the Doctor soon comes across a scheme courtesy of some alien invaders intent on replacing the population of the Earth with death-dealing automated mannequins. And bear in mind, the idea of a weaponised robot assassin was about 15 years before the Terminator, and was even 3 years before Westworld.
The 4 chapters go by quite quickly and move along at a good old pace. There's a lot of good suspense here, and quite a bit more action than some other Doctor Who storylines. As it was shot on film and on location, there seems to have been more attention paid to the production values as well, giving it a uniquely cinematic feel. There's certainly no running around in corridors here, which is something that later incarnations of Doctor Who would be shamelessly parodied over.
There's only one thing to do now, but I can't quite remember what it is.
Run up and down lots of corridors!
That was the one!
Take it. Take it.
Having said that, there is an odd moment where the Doctor, during one of his escape attempts, manages to evade capture by taking a shower, whereupon we see that this Doctor has the tattoo of a serpent on his arm.
Yes, that was rather startling. Whereas Pertwee obtained it during his service in the Royal Navy, it does seem rather odd that the Doctor would be sporting some body art. Does this ever get addressed at all?
Funny you should actually mention that. We did eventually get an in-universe reason for it, provided in the new Adventures novel, Christmas on a Rational Planet, as being a Time Lord symbol signifying exile, removed once the Doctor's exile was formally ended following the events of the 3 Doctors.
How did I know that you would know that? Well, anyway, there's a sequence in which the mannequins break through high street shop windows to slaughter pedestrians, which still remains a chilling high point of Doctor Who's entire history. This must have been the stuff of nightmare fuel for its young audience at the time, especially if they knew that they were going shopping with Mum on the high street the following day. Things do turn a little silly with a subplot involving a waxworks museum, whilst the ultimate battle with the mannequin's consciousness is more likely to induce laughter than fear. But as vintage television nostalgia goes, this is fantastic entertainment, even though it'll probably put me off calamari for quite a while.
The DVD extras on here actually didn't make it to the Blu-ray, which is here. So any Huron completist might want to consider holding on to the DVD and not replacing it with the Blu-ray version if they're wanting to keep all of those extras. These extras include commentary from Nicholas Courtney and Caroline John. Sadly, both actors are no longer with us. Subtitles that offer background facts and figures, TV trailers for BBC Two's Doctor Who Night. A gallery of previously unpublished photos, and even an amusing 5-minute public information film for recruiting new unit agents. If you're going to start watching Doctor Who, then you can't go wrong with starting here. It's one of the best opening stories for any new Doctor, and it's no wonder that the first episode of the Christopher Eccleston era of Doctor Who also had the villainous shop dummies coming back to life and attacking people.
As stated before, this is the first Doctor Who story of the 1970s and the first story in colour. Spearhead from Space is a strong entry in the Pertwee era and one of the very best overall. It makes for an ideal jumping on point for those of you who want to get into the classic Doctor Who episodes, but are a bit wary of the black and white episodes from the William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton eras, where a number of the episodes are missing or incomplete. Pertwee would go on to play the Doctor for 5 years, longer than any of his predecessors, and his era as Doctor Who is a fondly remembered one. I'm sure this won't be the last time we'll be looking at some classic Doctor Who, not just from Pertwee's run, but from other eras. Having said that, another excellent story from the Pertwee era is Inferno, the finale to his first series on Doctor Who. Here, the Doctor finds himself transported to an alternative version of Earth, where UNIT are in fact the evildoers, ruling over England with a fascist dictatorship, where slavery and firing squads are all part of the day-to-day schedule.
Unity's strength.
All of the Doctor's familiar, beloved companions are now evil, darker versions of themselves, with Brigadier Lethbridge-Stewart himself sporting an eye patch, like the evil alternative reality version of Mr. Spock, sporting a goatee.
So, you've got a few more Doctor Who DVDs that we can go through then, have you?
Well, yes, you could say that I've got quite a few Doctor Who DVDs knocking around in the old DVD cupboard, including one in particular is Genesis of the Daleks, one of the Tom Baker stories. That might be quite a good one to review in the future, as Russell T Davies would say that later on that this was technically the first shot in the Time War, which is something that would dominate a good portion of the modern series. What about you, Luke? We can look at one of your DVDs next time if you like. Have you got any Doctor Who DVDs that we can look at?
So, you want to know if I've got any more Doctor Who DVDs? Well, funny you should mention that.
Wow. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Like we said at the start, this was intended to be a review of some of the random DVDs that we bought and not watched, which gives us an excuse to watch them and talk about them. Although, considering that we're talking about Doctor Who, this episode might end up being about as long as one of our regular ones. If you liked the video, then please leave a like and a comment, and share this video across your social media, in particular with any fans of classic Doctor Who. And we'll see you again next time, when we pull another random DVD from the cupboard.